This video is almost identical to the previous video, except in the previous video the price that you got for wheat was $2.25, and now we're going to lower the wheat price even more and say, what if after harvesting wheat you only get $1.75 per bushel? If that's the case, do you produce wheat? Is it even worth it? And if so, how much? Remember how this table is set up. We have choices. We cannot produce wheat, and if that's the case, then we're going to lose $50 per acre. Or we can decide that we do want to produce wheat. And if we decide we want to produce wheat, we then have to figure out how much nitrogen we're going to apply. Should we apply 0, 10, 20 pounds of nitrogen per acre, or maybe perhaps as much as 60? And depending on the nitrogen application, we get a certain amount of wheat to sell. And of course, over here in the far right, you know how to do these calculations by now, so I'm doing them for you. We see the different profits associated with different nitrogen applications. And one thing is obvious: we're going to lose money no matter what. Every number in here is negative. But it's also clear that we should not want to produce any wheat at all. If we don't produce any wheat, we do lose $50 per acre. But if we produce any amount of wheat, we're going to lose even more than $50 per acre. So we do not want to produce wheat in this instance. Now let's look at the problem slightly differently. Notice that up here we have total variable costs, and remember, we can take total variable costs and make average variable costs by taking total variable costs and dividing it by the quantity of wheat produced. And if we do that, we get this table here. I've got average variable cost right there, and then I've got average total cost, where we just take the total cost at each different level of nitrogen application and divide it by the amount of wheat produced. Now remember, in a previous video we showed that profits can be stated as this. Profits can be shown to equal price minus the average variable cost times the quantity produced and subtract your fixed costs. And if you use that formula to calculate the profits for each different level nitrogen application, you get these numbers. And if you don't get these exact numbers, it's probably just due to a rounding error. Now notice in this formula that if it's the case that price is less than average variable cost, then that's going to be less than 0, and then you'll lose more than your fixed costs. Notice here in our table, the wheat price is $1.75 per bushel. The average variable cost at each different level of production is greater than $1.75 per bushel. And so no matter how much we produce, this term, price minus average variable cost, is always going to be negative. And let's just actually calculate it to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Let's assume that we're going to produce 35 bushels of wheat per acre. Well, our average variable cost is $1.83. So I'm going to come up here. Price is $1.75 minus $1.83 average variable cost. We're producing 35 bushels per acre here. And we're subtracting our fixed cost of 50. With this whole term right here just becomes negative 2.8, then minus 50 for the whole thing, which equals negative 52.8. And if we use the accounting way of denoting a loss, We just take away the negative sign and put it in brackets instead. By producing wheat, we added on to our losses. We know we're going to lose $50 per acre, but because price is always less than our average variable cost, we're going to spend more money on things like seed and fertilizer and pesticide and tractor fuel than we're going to bring in from our sales of wheat. Notice, even though this says 52.75, that's just because of some rounding differences. For instance, this 1.83 that I have there is really 1.8286. And the main lesson of all of this is that if price is less than the average variable cost at any level of production, do not produce. And this is true regardless of the value of fixed costs. Whether fixed costs are zero or whether they're astronomical, fixed costs has no impact on whether you should produce wheat or how much you produce if you do produce it. Now, of course, in the long run, fixed costs matter, but if we've got to pay the loan payments on the tractor shed and the tractors, no matter how much we produce, then that loan payment is not going to impact how much wheat we produce this year. Instead, those fixed costs, those will help determine whether we can keep on producing or whether we have to go bankrupt many years from now.